So again today we go through the 20 associated mental factors. They're also sometimes called translated as the 20 secondary afflictions. So then the tiny problem with that is that in our mind, when we hear secondary, then we think they are less crucial. But so the reality is that they're sort of like manifestations of the 10 of the 6 root afflictions. And so no one can definitely not say that they are less heavy. So, so then here we so then here we have first, sometimes translated as wrath. Also, I think that in my booklet, so there are 4 possibilities, like different words: wrath, rage, belligerence, or fury. And then, so as the definition it gives, the mental factor of wrath is extremely harmful intent that wishes to inflict harm, such as striking while in proximity to one of the 9 foundations of harmful intent. And then, so the 9 foundations of harmful intent are the 3, so these 9 thoughts. This has harmed me, this is harming me, or this will harm me, so relating it to oneself. Then this has harmed, is harming, or will harm my friends, because so the mind thinks in terms of I and mine, inherently existent I and mine. And so that does not extend, is not limited to just oneself as a person, but then one also thinks of one's friends, one's country, relatives, etc. in terms of mine. And then the 3 thoughts, this has benefited, is benefiting, or will benefit my enemies. So this is called the 9 foundations of generally the 9 foundations of anger. So this is not restricted to wrath. And so it is the basis for resorting to weapons, injuring. So wrath, the mental factor of wrath or rage, is the basis for restoring to weapons, injuring the other person directly, or carrying out actions aimed at harming the object. It precedes the violence, and likely will also accompany it. Yes, so this mental factor is a manifestation of anger, and so it is a particular strong and type of anger that then becomes a direct cause, primarily for physical harm. So, for example, if one takes things and throws them at the other person, such as the plates and glasses, etc. So you will see, so there are different types of anger. Would you have a question with regards to this specific one? So I think that's why one has the anger that is part of the what is called a root affliction. But that sort of just describes anger in general. And here we get different manifestations. So then the next one is resentment. Or also one alternative translation would be the thought of vengeance. Or in one's mind, but I don't know if there's one single word for it. So that's why then I wrote the thought of vengeance. So the mind that wishes for retaliation. And so resentment is a consciousness that does not give up the thought of retaliation and anger, wanting to inflict harm and retaliate. It belongs to the family of anger, and it acts as the basis for impatience. So the thing, one difference between rage and resentment is, so rage will sort of immediately give rise to a violent action, and resentment is more lingering. So it's a little bit hard to say which one is more harmful. And many people, I like to think so, like many people, they're in prison because of rage. So out of some rage, they commit some action, for example, shooting somebody, and then they stay for the rest of their life in prison because of that one moment of rage. Resentment is more lingering, so it can poison one's mind for decades, and then it also poisons one's interactions with others. And of course, very dangerous, because one has sort of, part of the resentment is the idea, so wanting to extract vengeance, so payback. And so, of course, sooner or later, one will act on this. One usually acts on the things that are in one's mind. And and of course, sometimes one doesn't act on it, but it still poisons one's mind. Yeah, so it's hard to say. From one point of view, rage is the more dangerous one, because then one could likely be sent to prison, or one is actually physically harming the other person. But then on the other hand, the resentment is also, I think, unbelievably poisonous. So in the mind training teachings, the 7-point mind training, it gives advice concerning resentment. So for example, it says that one should not be, what's the word? Like a person hiding in, just now I can't remember the English word. How do you, when you, like somebody that is hiding in the bushes and is waiting for the person to pass by, to then attack them from the backside. How do you call that? Hiding in
ambush.
Yeah. Waiting in ambush. So, in the mind training, the 7-point mind training, so it says, so one should not be like a person waiting in ambush. And then he gives these examples. So it doesn't have to be, so drastic, like actually hiding in a bush somewhere. But even what one probably can find very common in one's interactions with other people. And so one is harboring all these resentments. And then one can also find this situation where one is sort of managing one's resentments, like in an argument with the other person, and then one is sort of calculating, or should I bring, one has harbored this one resentment from before, but it was not dealt with, and one is sort of keeping it inside one's mind, sort of to use as ammunition, or at a certain point. And then and then so the mind is sort of calculating, what is the best time that I can use this so that it really will sort of inflict maximum damage on the other person, or where can you really use it, to one's advantage. So it relates also to these kind of situations. So it says in the mind training teachings, therefore, so it says one should not be like a person waiting, in ambush, waiting to ambush somebody. Yeah, so I like to, so when we don't know, sometimes maybe we are at home, we have some free time, and we don't know also which Dharma practice to do. I think actually one of the most excellent Dharma practices and is, so to just look in one's mind and one's resentments that one is harboring, and then sort of clearing them out, sort of addressing them. Because they sort of need to be addressed. So the mind needs to be cleaned, from all forms of anger. And as it was written there, so it's written there, so one can have anger, and so one can harbor resentments in relation to things that happened in the past. So that is very common. Then also regarding things that are happening in the present. And then it's also concerning things, that may happen or will happen in the future. And as it mentioned at the time of the during the 11 virtuous mental factors, then it says in the text regarding non-attachment, non-anger, and non-ignorance, that actually so the whole Dharma practice is summed up in these three. So that's what that's actually really what Dharma practice in the end is about reducing one's anger, one's attachment, and one's ignorance, and so the different expressions of these. Then, so of course, the mind. So on the one hand, so one generates anger, or so resentment or wrath, etc. So towards people that harm oneself, but then also regarding those that harm one's friends, relatives, and basically and other people and sentient beings that one likes, that one sort of fall into the category, or that one has put sort of into the category of oneself. And then there's others. And with regards to others, it's usually the opposite. So one usually generates resentment automatically towards others. And then it's a reverse. So the things that benefit those that are regarded as others, then one views those with anger and resentment. So if one has an enemy, and then people that benefit the enemy, or people that praise the enemy, for example, if one has a person that one dislikes, and then there's a third person who praises that person, then it could even become like unbearable in the mind. So again, it becomes a cause for anger. Yes, so that is really important. So to clear the mind of all these different manifestations of anger. So slowly, one by one. By generating the antidotes. And so it is very important because if you don't address the anger, then it will still be there and it will. So then we have the next one. So that is a concealment. So concealment belongs to the family of ignorance. And so it is a consciousness that due to the power of ignorance, wishes to hide faults when these are pointed out by virtuous teachers and so forth, with a motivation of wanting to benefit. So, so I give you as example. So this is so specifically the situation, where another person, so with with a motivation to benefit us, then points out faults that we have. So there could be, here, it could be a teacher, it could be parents, could be friends. And then, so instead of so one denies it. Like one says, "Oh, I never, cake." So you deny it. Who took the piece of cake? Who took my piece of cake that I kept for dinner in the fridge? And then you deny, no, I don't know. Also, I don't know. And so concealment was the opposite of acknowledging faults and mistakes. And so the likelihood is, because we don't just with that other person, we somehow deny it simultaneously in our mind. So that counteracts, the element of like confessing faults or admitting faults, purifying faults. Because if we can't admit to ourselves that we engage into like a harmful or non-virtuous action, then of course, that in itself is counterproductive. It's the opposite of purifying. So that's why in the function it says concealment acts as the basis for losing regret. And in the long run, it causes one to be separated from physical and mental happiness. Because then we don't purify the karma. So because we don't purify the karma stays in our mind. And so it becomes a cause for physical and mental unhappiness in the future. And also, so Shantideva, he says that if somebody like anybody. He says he relates it to anybody, because there can be also sometimes the situation, of course, of uninvited constructive criticism, or maybe any kind of criticism is uninvited. That could be. Anyway, so he says, so even if the other person does not have a good motivation, but if we, so what we do is we check our actions of body, speech, and mind, and so if we find that it is accurate, then so we put the other person on the top of our crown, like our teacher, because so irrespective whether they have a good motivation or not, is because they help us to improve our qualities of body, speech, and mind. So in this way, they brought us closer to enlightenment. Because so becoming enlightened, so the process is not like sort of instantaneous, but on the one side, we need to increase the qualities that we have already. So on the one hand, increasing the qualities that we already have, and then on the other hand, creating like generating new qualities. And so that's, it's usually done in micro steps, small steps, like building a brick wall, one brick at a time. And then reducing faults in the same way. And so then that person has helped us. So that's why with that. So then, and also for the practice of purification, when one does meditates on the 4 powers, so then it is of course very important that one recognizes the action as harmful. Would you have any questions so far? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I'm just.
I should anyway. Then the next after.
Excuse me.
The Lin after.
Okay, sorry.
So
yeah, I'm just thinking how that's a reoccurring activity with one's spouse.
Mm-hmm.
You're concealing, or you don't want to hear, particularly from your spouse or your, your faults being pointed out, or just idiosyncrasies being pointed out. Because that's really real then. And but it's very interesting. When I first looked at the text, I'm like, this is getting a bit nitpicky. But then when you really pull it apart, because as you go deeper and deeper, to see the minor workings of the mind, it does give you. I think it helps to be aware of how insidious the mind's activity is. And that's good. Thank you.
Yes, so anger, and I think especially resentment, is very insidious, and there is always that aspect that we cannot get around the dependent arising. So if we have resentment to somebody, we cannot at the same time say, oh, I have no resentment for that person. Because, as you know, so the person is labeled in dependence on the 5 aggregates. So basically on what is happening in body and mind. So, it will affect our relationship with sentient beings if we have resentment. So, more resentment is less love and compassion. So you can't benefit that person fully. Because if we have a resentment for a person, automatically our wish to benefit that person is less. And but so of course, overall it is a big job. So I think it's also useful to recognize that there are very strong emotions of anger, then there are more subtle ones, maybe there are important ones and not so important ones. And like with which ones to deal first. So it's a question of with what. So in the mind training teachings, again, the 7-point mind training, so it says, it's better to address the more heavy afflictions first. And so, but that is of course individual. So, so we need to see, for in our own situation, so what is the best, what is the best affliction? Which affliction is best to address first? And then there's, of course, there's the aspect, how to address the affliction, skillfully. I think that is really important. And like, for example, if we have like the small mind that always focuses on each and every of our afflictions, and then sort of wrestles with them, and then is constantly caught up in these afflictions, I don't know, if that is really the meaning of addressing and dealing with afflictions. Right, like as I mentioned yesterday, like as we mentioned, like basically every Saturday, so that the element of mental happiness that is very important, very crucial in Dharma practice. Because the mental happiness that comes from the Dharma, it automatically sort of makes the mind less vulnerable to whatever is going on and whatever may be just in one's own mind. So like the mind becomes sort of like a strong ocean, that is less less affected by things around itself. And of course, so there is that thing, if you incorporate emptiness in our practice, so if you reflect upon, that there is always that opportunity to change our point of view of what is happening. And that is really true, the moment we can find in our mind, something positive in what is happening, and we label it as something positive, that moment is like, one's whole inner world changed. So, making emptiness useful by remembering, so things don't exist inherently, but they appear to us in the way our mind views them or labels them. So then there was another question. Now
Hi, Venerable.
Yes, Lynn, yes, okay.
It sounds, well, I guess one clarification is it sounds as if when you were describing concealment that and how it how it, you're talking about how it benefits or doesn't benefit the other. I think like what I gleaned from that is it's a part of cherishing the self. And so I just sort of wanted to clarify that it's part of self-cherishing and that grasping for the self. And then
the concealment.
Yeah, concealment.
Well, so it's, I mean, so technically speaking, so the afflictions, they all arise from ignorance. So specifically, so the grasping at I and mine is inherently existent. So the self-cherishing, technically is usually not given as the root of the afflictions.
Mm-hmm.
And the self-cherishing, because it is technically not an affliction, usually is not, in these presentations, is not, it's not presented.
Okay, it's not a part of ignorance then?
But no, it's no, self-cherishing is not a part of ignorance, so technically. But practically, actually, practically, specifically our level so is very coarse. So we are not like arhats or bodhisattvas, that deal with very subtle elements of self-cherishing and ignorance. And so in our mind, it's more a little bit like a mixture, actually. It's more like Shantideva describes it in the wheel of sharp weapons. And in this text, the wheel of sharp weapons, so Shantideva actually describes always the self-cherishing as the root of the afflictions. And so that, that has a very great value. So for us experientially, of course, the self-cherishing and the self-cherishing is linked with all the afflictions. Because the self-cherishing also, one doesn't want to admit, that one has done something wrong, perhaps. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And just one other question. I'm not sure I understand the relationship between concealment and spite.
Oh, there comes, there's no relation, I mean, the list, but it doesn't lead from one to the next.
Okay, it's just separate.
To be honest, I don't see any particular like sequence, like follow-up. No, it's a little bit, seems a little bit, yeah, so I don't know the reason for the particular sequence, but it's definitely not leading from one to the next.
Okay, it's not like spite is an expression of concealment.
No.
Okay, thank you.
No, so spite is an expression of anger also. So actually, rage or wrath, and then resentment or the thought of vengeance, and spite, they're all different expressions of the root affliction of anger.
Thank you, Venerable.
Yeah, I have a question, Venerable. If we can go back to resentment, here resentment is a consciousness that brings vengeance, and it acts as a basis for patience, and I do understand that.
No, it acts as the basis for impatience.
For impatience, that's what I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. Now, what about resentment that does not lead to vengeance, doesn't come from vengeance, but it still is the basis for impatience? One could have resentment without having a vengeance. So is it something different?
Well, again, here I think it's maybe maybe a little bit again the same theme, that we addressed, maybe on the second Saturday. So it is always a translation issue. So the Buddha didn't use the Oxford Dictionary And so, so we have terms being translated with meaning from the Sanskrit to the Tibetan and now to the English. And so, of course, one uses the words most of the time that are available in the English to describe, what is there in the Tibetan. So I'm not, so I'm like, which kind of resentment would you describe that is not, that does not contain like a sort of thought of retaliation?
Well, for example, I could resent being told to stay home right now. I could have,
Okay.
but I don't have any sense of vengeance. I mean,
I don't know if maybe that is not even, yeah, that's true. I mean, so that's why, in all these discussions, so when we want to study these mental factors, it's always better to, look at the meaning, the definition. And so not to try to just understand it just from the label, the name. So it's very useful to think in terms of, I have the meaning of something, like the definition or the meaning, and then I have the name. Yeah. All right, so then we better get going to spite. So spite, so it says here, so spite is harmful intent preceded by wrath and the thought, and the thought of vengeance. It wants to speak harshly because of enmity when others point out one's faults, and it is without regret and the intention to declare. Yeah, so I mean, there's then more, but basically, so the basic difference between wrath and spite seems to me that spite is the form of anger that primarily leads to harmful verbal actions. And what is labeled as wrath or anger, wrath or rage, primarily leads to violent physical actions. So here it says, spite is the harmful intent, so that is preceded by wrath or rage. So one first gets unbelievably angry, and then with some people, then that leads to a physical action, and then with other people, then it leads to like they think about then, like, what could I say to really hurt the other person? And so it then first, spite is generated in the mind. So one becomes spiteful, and then that leads to verbal action. So that's sort of the primary. And resentment doesn't, or the thought of vengeance. So that mental factor usually does not lead to immediate action of body or speech. Can, of course, but primarily, if you look at just the primary aspect, is something, it's the kind of anger that sort of then one sort of keeps inside, and it stays there for a very long time. So one sort of waits for whatever reason until one pays it back to the other person. So that's like a basic differences. Of course, then if you go into the details, it's not necessarily always like that, but so the basic differences. And so Asanga and Gyaltsab say, so they specify spite further, saying it's specifically in the context of being criticized. So when one is being criticized, and then one becomes what one calls spiteful. So then we have the next one is jealousy. So jealousy, so that one, no, so directly one tends to think it, anyway, so if you read the definitions, what is meant with it. So a highly agitated mental factor belonging to the family of anger that is unable to bear the qualities of others because of attachment to gain and praise. So belonging to the family of anger, jealousy causes one to be unable to be mentally happy. Yeah, so I think normally we tend to think jealousy belongs more to the family of attachment, but so that defines it, jealousy itself actually as belonging to the family of anger, but it is of course based on attachment, like attachment to gain, attachment to fame, attachment to objects, attachment to people, etc. And then, so because of this very strong attachment, if somebody else, because attachment is always directed at oneself, oneself as a person, or as we said before, so oneself could be oneself as a category, like my family, my friends, for example, my children. Or then, like if parents, they're attached, usually they're attached to their children to a degree, of course. So they rejoice if their own children do very well in school. And if the children of others do well in school, then they don't do, so they don't rejoice. So then there is more regarded with jealousy or anger. And yeah, so attachment is always directed at oneself. And so then because of this very strong attachment, if somebody else has success, so that that could be worldly success, or also in Dharma, and then no one is unable to bear it. The mind is unable to bear it. And of course, also to relate it to what we just discussed before, of course, the self-cherishing, is right there also in that mix. But, and so the very good antidote, so again, we can't just decide not to be jealous. But we need to reflect, we need to implement the antidote, which is rejoicing. So rejoicing in other people's success, qualities. So that so that counteracts the jealousy. As my teacher Geshe Doga, he once said, so as a normal person, it's usually the one or the other. So if we see the success of somebody else, then either we are jealous or we rejoice. So it's usually the one or the other. And that's why it's important that we make a conscious effort to rejoice. So that it can be worldly, like rejoicing in the wealth of the other person. So it could be in relation to wealth, or in relation to social status. Then also in relation to, what I think one can call it like social, not social status, but like one's social situation, for example, like sometimes the people who don't have a relationship, so they are jealous of those that have a relationship, things like that. Or health. If somebody who experiences a lot of health problems, and then they look with jealousy at those that are more healthy, or that got cured. You see, it's when one gets actually, because it is anger, and it's based on attachment, and it's totally, self-cherishing. So, so that word that Andy used before, insidious, is actually a very good word. If we really reflect, actually, not sort of necessarily, not just because we hear, oh, so the afflictions, they are bad, and so we shouldn't have them. But if we really reflect on their insidious nature, we will recognize unbelievably insidious. If one is not able to rejoice, if something good, even minor good, is happening to somebody else, it's unbelievably insidious. The negativity in one's mind is unbelievable. And in that moment, like to talk about bodhicitta and all sentient beings, it's just mere words, really. You go to the center, all sentient beings, everybody does their prayers, all sentient beings may have happiness and the causes of happiness. But then, like the neighbor, maybe they get a new car and you get so jealous, of their new car. It's like something like that. Yeah, so the rejoicing. And then it's also good, I think it's also useful to reflect that jealousy also happens in the Dharma context, of course. So if somebody else is able to do something in Dharma terms that we are not able to do, it's also very important to rejoice in that. So if they're able to do extensive studies, but we are not able to do so for some reason, or they're able to do extensive retreat, but we are not able to do for some reason. So it's very, very important to rejoice in these, in these Dharma successes of other people. And one karmic aspect of rejoicing is that one creates the cause for oneself to achieve that in the future. The karmic cause.
Venerable?
So I know I always sort of, tongue-in-cheek, I always like to joke, well, so if you want to have a Ferrari, so one of the best ways to get a Ferrari is to rejoice in the people who have a Ferrari. And from the karmic point of view, so you probably have heard this already, but rejoicing is very important, because even though we don't have that success or we didn't carry out that action, for example, also in the point of view of Dharma, if somebody, they do a great Dharma action, like building a stupa, for example, comes to mind, and so we rejoice in that. So even though we did not carry out the action, so we still partake in that karma. We create karma similar to the original karma. And in fact, if we, like if our mind happens to be more pure, so let's say a higher bodhisattva rejoices in the actions of a lower bodhisattva, so the higher bodhisattva, without having carried out the actual action, simply by rejoicing in it, so one builds up even more positive karma. So the rejoicing is very important. It is, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, he always points out that how important it is to rejoice, and how it is a skillful way to accumulate a lot of positive karma in a very brief amount of time, very easily. So one can just lie on one's sofa, and just rejoice for 15 seconds or 30 seconds and something, and already one has accumulated a huge amount of positive karma. And also, because it's in the word, so rejoicing is something, so it generates mental happiness. Yes, and I think we may need to go on, otherwise the 2 hours may become 3 hours. So then the next one is miserliness. so miserliness clearly belongs to the family of attachment. And so it is a mental factor that holds tightly onto possessions because of attachment to gain praise, not being able to let go. And so miserliness acts as the basis for not gaining possessions in the future. Yeah. So yeah, so it's also the mind that holds on to, for example, possessions. So miserliness is primarily in relation to possessions. And so one may not think of oneself as being miserly. And one may not be miserly. So the opposite of being miserly is being generous. So that is the opposite mental attitude, wanting to give away. So it's just important in relation, I think it's just important in relation to oneself. So to ascertain so one's level of miserliness and then to counteract it. So that's a basic Dharma practice. But generating generosity and practicing generosity is a basic Dharma practice. It is also the first of the 6 parameters. So, so for example, one is always asked for money. So, coming to the Dharma center, being in the Dharma realm, no one is always asked for money. So there's never, and then also, like on TV, on the internet. So there are always like the different, like humanitarian organizations. They're always asking for donations, support, and sometimes it's not a lot. I don't know, like they ask for $5 a month, things like that, and but still, you see, the mind, finds it very hard to give. Or let's say, so if then if one finds one finds it very hard to give, so that that is the miserliness. And then it could be that the person has no problem spending money in relation to oneself. But then if it is about others, then the mind becomes very miserly. Like some people, when they try to calculate the tip front, and the mind so becomes very calculating. One doesn't want to give too little, not necessarily because one has compassion, but because one wants to go back to the restaurant and one doesn't want to get a bad reputation. But at the same time, one is unbelievably afraid. So there could be the situation, I don't know what is the standard these days in New York. I don't know, how much is it? How many percent of the bill? 20%? Is that the standard?
20%.
15 or 20, yeah.
15 or 20? 20. Anyway, so whatever the standard is, and then in one's mind, so if one sort of starts to think, okay, how about I give a little bit more, like 21%? And then just to notice in one's mind, so is it a struggle or not? Right. So that's due to miserliness. That's due to miserliness. And in some way, miserliness sometimes seems to be one of the prime obstacles to Dharma practice. Because it could be a situation where the person, they do all kinds of things, so they recite mantras, they go to teachings, they visualize themselves as deities, with so many heads and arms and different colors and so forth. But then when they see the beggar on the street, the mind sort of constricts, they become afraid, they start to sweat, to go to the other side of the road. Yeah, so all of that would show, they're really, inside the mind, because the perfection of generosity, there's a reason actually. Here, there is a sequence, why the Buddha taught the perfection of generosity first. And also very crucial then, if one doesn't practice the perfection of generosity, one leaves out one of the causes for another precious human rebirth in the future. So because, as Nagarjuna said, so generosity is the cause for wealth. How many did we finish? Now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right. So the next ones, then the next two, they are called yes, maybe just so as example. Like one of the person who built the Gomba in Nalanda monasteries, so he raised all the money himself, Jean-François, and so he told me, so one of his sponsors, a more wealthy person, so he had this sort of this situation, or this moment with the sponsor. So the sponsor was a wealthier person. So first he gave 100,000 euros. And then he gave another 100,000. And so he explained to Jean-François, well, when I gave the first 100,000, it didn't really present any challenge in my mind. And he wanted to give an amount that sort of expanded, his mind and his generosity. So he wanted to challenge his mind. So, and I think that's sort of how we have to go about it. So we have to actually sort of expand our mind and challenge our minds. According to our means, of course, and to according where we are. So then the next two, I translated them as pretension and dissimulation. And they're sort of quite close in some regard. So pretension is about showing qualities one does not possess because of strong attachment to gain and praise. And dissimulation is about hiding faults because of attachment to gain and praise. Yeah, so the dissimulation is different from the mental factor of concealment. So that here this is the very specific situation of wanting to attain gain, like financial gain, material gain, and also praise, wanting to be praised by others, wanting to gain a reputation and so forth. So that on the one hand, one pretends to have qualities that one does not possess out of those attachments. And then on the other hand, one consciously hides faults. One hides, consciously or unconsciously, hides faults for the same reason. So in the mind training practices, there is this advice, which is actually to counteract self-cherishing, but it can be also implemented here. That one should actually act in the opposite. So one should sort of more talk in terms of one's shortcomings, and if one has qualities, so one should keep those to oneself, hide one's qualities. So, of course, one needs to be skillful. One needs to be skillful with that advice. So, if we're meeting with a friend, and then it doesn't mean that now we have to tell them all the mistakes that we did and all our faults. That would become very challenging and boring for the other person too. But sometimes one meets these people. One goes for coffee with somebody, and it's really impossible to have a proper conversation with the other person, because the only thing they're really interested in is themselves. And so they talk all the time. It's always about themselves. It's about all the good things they did and all the bad things that other people did. And it's very hard to get in any word, so sideways or anyways, if one wants to talk about something else. So, because they always start to talk again with something that relates to them. And so, for example, then if oneself notices, or I have also this tendency, and then usually also what happens is, so for example, the person always consciously praises themselves and criticizes others. So if one notices, in a conversation or with friends or acquaintances at work, so one has this tendency, always praising oneself, criticizing others. So to counteract this, so for example, to talk more about the qualities of others. And then maybe also talk from time to time about things that oneself did wrong or doesn't know how to do. Mm. 7, 8. So then the next one also belongs to the family of anger, harmfulness or cruelty. So it is the wish to abuse others, being a consciousness of non-compassion, non-sympathy, and non-empathy. And then so here, non-compassion being identified as, if one wishes to do the abusing oneself, verbal abuse, physical abuse, and maybe it doesn't need, as Pabongo Rinpoche points out, like harmful speech. It doesn't necessarily need to be sort of harsh. It can be also very polite, but if the intent is to inflict mental harm on the other person, for example. Or some people, they have this motivation of wanting to keep the other person down. So they always think about, what can I say to undermine the self-confidence of the other person? Or what can I say so that the other person feels bad? Instead of thinking about, what can I say so that the other person feels good about themselves? What can I say so that the other person generates a good feeling or feels good, etc. And so anyhow, yeah. So abusing. So one doesn't need to think that that means necessarily with a stick or a whip. Even though maybe some people at home, they have a whip, next to the umbrella in case the other person doesn't behave very well. So, so, so then non-sympathy anyway. So it's here, if one wishes to order others to be abusive, and then non-empathy, you see also if one rejoices. So that's the thing with the rejoicing. So if our mind is negative, then there is a tendency also to rejoice in the negative actions of others. So and karmically, it's the same. So we accumulate karma similar to the harmful action. So it's very, very dangerous. And if our anger or cruelty or viciousness is stronger than that of the other person, the negative karma that we create by rejoicing in the harmful action of the other person could even be worse. So one needs to be very careful. For example, also I think, yeah. So then, so I don't know, would you prefer to have a 5 minutes break or to go on? Because today we are longer.
I could go through for my own.
All right.
Me too. I'm good with going through.
Yeah, me too. I am
Sure.
as well. I can keep going.
So it's only me that wants a break.
But Venerable, you should take a break if you want one. We don't mind at all giving you minutes.
No, I can't. I can't.
Practice generosity, Venerable. We can practice generosity.
If you don't take a break, it becomes very embarrassing for me to take a break.
No, it's fine.
I'm good with a break.
You've been doing all the work.
I really need a break.
Yeah.
Okay, done.
So then next we have what is called shamelessness and non-embarrassment or inconsideration. And they are the opposite of the two virtuous mental factors, shame and consideration. So in that sense, they are easy. So they have, when we reflect on them, so they help. It helps the understanding because they're the opposite. So so shamelessness, if we go, is the non-fear of negativity by taking oneself or the Dharma as the reason. So it can belong to the family of attachment or anger or ignorance, and it fulfills the action or function of supporting all the other root and associated afflictions. So then he gives us the example. For example, if a monk is in a situation where he could drink alcohol, but becomes apprehensive about the negativity of such an action, taking himself as the reason, thinking this is not an appropriate action for a monk, then that is called shame. And so then the opposite, that would be called shamelessness. So when one thinks that action would be inappropriate, that negative action would be inappropriate for me. If one thinks, I know, like it doesn't matter, or even if one thinks, oh, that action, that negative action, so it is appropriate for me, then, so of course, as soon as one thinks that because of the dependent arising, so there's nothing that blocks the negative action. So we need to, in our mind, we need to have the mental state or the intent, so not wanting to carry out the negative action. Because otherwise, through the dependent arising, it's like opening the door. And then even if intellectually, maybe we know I shouldn't do this action or it's not so good, but because inside, we want to carry out the action, so then it's almost like not stopping, like, it becomes unstoppable. So also based on reason and understanding, thinking about karma, so whatever works for oneself, but one needs to maybe also actually the recognition of the pliancy that comes with virtuous actions. That actually, one disadvantage of negative actions, whether it's an anger or attachment, is always, so it doesn't generate pliancy. So the mental, in the end, one is always left with mental unhappiness, mental dullness, mental heaviness, etc. And they're actually, so the virtuous mind, less attachment or less anger. So the virtuous mind, the virtuous side, it always has that aspect of pliancy. And also, it is said, as Chekhov says in the 7-point mind transformation, there's this one point, this one advice he gives. He says, he talks about getting the right taste. And he says, so the right taste is the taste for the Dharma. So, so in this context, for example, getting a taste for refraining from virtuous actions, by knowing through one's own experience that actually, one will actually feel better. So it does not become something that is just imposed on oneself. And one thinks, I should refrain from that action, but actually that will make me unhappy. No, that is long-term probably not so effective. So if through one's own experience, one knows, so if I carry out this action, but the end result, it will only be unhappiness. So the desired happiness, it will not come about. If I now refrain from that action, that will actually, short-term and also long-term, be more conducive, to mental health and mental happiness. So if one knows this through one's own experience, and then automatically, so this, the mental state, I don't want to engage into the negative action, it's automatically there, and then so through that dependent arising, and automatically, one generates a less negative action, and automatically is mentally more happy, more free and more happy. Yeah, so that's so in relation, so the shamelessness, and then inconsideration, so there would be the opposite. It's more, or even one even thinks, so the negative action, so it's good to follow. So then, of course, within our mind, we have the attitude that the negative action is good to follow. Then, of course, so the mind and then the actions of body and speech, they will follow that. And they will follow that. You see, in the beginning of the mind, the mental factors, so there's this example of how the mental factors influence us and it gives this example of one drop of ink coloring the whole glass of water. And so we need to be careful what is in our mind, because So, we can't, if something, if it's a positive mental state, it will influence the rest of our mind. If it's a positive thought, no matter how minimal, it will influence the rest of our mind. So because it is there, as soon as it is there, so it's a dependent arising. It's not just hypothetical, but it's a dependent arising. And the same also on the negative side. So if there are negative thoughts or emotions that belong more to the afflicted side, so one can deny that they are there, but that doesn't matter, because it influences the rest of the mind, whether one wants it or not. So it's a dependent arising. And you see, these are things that we can't just let go. So just to also maybe related to the famous letting go as the method. These are things that's it's in the mind. There's no way to let it go. If one can actually let it go, but in a way, that it actually is then not there in the mind anymore. That's top. But sort of just sitting there, for half an hour, with the concept in mind, I should let things go, but it doesn't actually happen. That's totally useless. So that means, that we actually need to address, over time, so these different mental states in our mind. But the best way is, you see, to have the main focus on the positive, so to generate the practice of the Dharma and the focus of the positive, because so not getting caught up in wanting to analyze our mind, for each and every negativity, how big or how small it is or may not be. If you do that, then the mind gets caught up in all that negativity, and that also does not really become the antidote. If we put the main focus of our Dharma practice, like 80%, 70%, 80%, on the generation of the path, on the generation of positive attitudes, love and compassion, patience, meditating on the virtuous object, Shakyamuni Buddha, reciting mantras, and you're basically developing the positive side, contemplating emptiness, impermanence, etc. You see, then, through the development of those positive, practicing proper reliance on the teacher, so through the development of those positive mental factors, see the negative, whether we were aware that they are there or not, they get reduced anyway. It's like light and darkness. For example, Pabongka Rinpoche in The Liberation in the Palm of One's Hand, and he lists 8 benefits of properly relying on the spiritual friend, and 8 disadvantages of, then, for example, breaking one's or guru devotion or not properly relying on one's friend. And so one of those 8 disadvantages he mentions, and I think that's really profound. He says, so if one breaks one's guru devotion, one will lose qualities that one didn't even know that were there. So, so if we keep our focus, on the practicing the Dharma, developing positive mental states, developing the Lamrim, so that is the main thing. And through that, whatever is there on the negative side, so that will be reduced anyway. Anyway, so the more Dharma there is in one's mind, so the less rubbish is there in one's mind. But if we keep our mind focused on the rubbish all the time, that does not become the antidote. And the mind becomes more and more involved in that. And then so one starts to think, it should go, but it doesn't go. Yeah. Then so some aspect, of course, has to do with understanding more and more how one's mind works, how the afflictions work. But that shouldn't be the main aspect of one's Dharma practice. Because even if we know how an affliction works, if the antidote is not there in our mind, then the affliction will still control our mind. But on the other hand, if we have generated a very strong antidote, like very strong love and compassion, even if we don't know in detail how anger works, the anger will be less. And even if we haven't identified all our resentments in the specific instances, but that there will be less. So, then comes one associated affliction that one may be also very familiar with, is lethargy. So lethargy, again, so it is the opposite of one of the virtuous mental factors. So that is, lethargy is the opposite of pliancy. So if we compare those two, trying to understand them in their contrast is very useful. So pliancy is the opposite of lethargy, and lethargy is the opposite of pliancy. So in Dharma, it is always about the Dharma practice. So the lethargy is also specifically in relation to Dharma practice. How much energy does one have for Dharma practice? How enthusiastic is the mind when one practices the Dharma? And then specifically, so lethargy refers to the physical and mental, like unworkability, unserviceability that one experiences, for example, when one sits down to meditate formally, or when one sits down to Dharma teachings and so forth. So there are many examples. So the lethargy is caused by what's called like afflictive physical and mental tendencies. So there's sort of the immediate basis, I think, for lethargy, and of course the afflictions. But it is very interesting. So in the text, so it talks about afflicted physical and mental tendencies. So a person with a very strong samsaric mind, with lots of attachment, so they will have endless energy. They will have endless energy for actions of attachment. But then, when they turn to the Dharma, it can be for them like hitting a brick wall. Like I had an acquaintance in New Zealand once. So she was actually the center, she was the center director anyway. So she told me, so she was a little bit a person like that, I mean, she was a very nice person, but, so qualitative. Anyway, it doesn't mean it's a bad person, but so she told me, she had taken the medicine Buddha initiation from Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I think. So there's the commitment, one day, or maybe Lama Zopa Rinpoche, I think he said, okay, you choose, how many mantras, your daily commitment, you choose yourself. So she chose one. And so she confided in me or told me, so even that one mantra presents for her an extraordinary challenge. So that's sort of like very strong example of non-workability. Because when the mind turns towards Dharma, so the mantra, the medicine Buddha mantra is a very powerful virtuous object. And so then even reciting one mantra, because all the inner strong karmic baggage and afflicted mental and physical tendencies, so it becomes an extraordinary challenge just to recite this one mantra. So, so the lethargy is specifically, the mental factor of lethargy is specifically in relation to Dharma practice, not in general. Yeah. So that's why also you see in our Dharma practice, we all have, of course, plenty of afflicted mental and physical tendencies and unpurified karmas. And that's why, why I think so in our Dharma practice, it's also important, you see, that we sort of challenge ourselves. So that when we may have our daily practice, we sit down to practice, and then we may experience this. The mind becomes very dark, very heavy. Even also physically, it expresses itself physically in actual physical symptoms. The person becomes tired, they just want to lie down. And if one would ask oneself, is this now just in my mind because of my obstacles, or am I really tired? And then the answer may come back, oh no, I'm really so tired, I just need to lie down. And I think then it's very important, to not give into that, but to sort of push through, so recite mantras, specifically mantras that purify, so that then one gets some experience, and then after some time one notices, so if the mind gets purified a little bit, and then all at once, it becomes easier. So one generates some pliancy, and then after that. Then, of course, one reaches a point, now the mind has really become a little bit too tight. Now it's really better, conventionally speaking. Now it's really skillful to take a break. But not immediately just because one feels tired or dark or heavy, then to immediately think, oh, now I need to take a break. And then, usually like one sequence that very commonly happens, I think, is that then the person thinks, oh, now I'm too tired to practice the Dharma. I need to first do something else, which is usually something samsaric, to make oneself feel better. Going for walks. And now first I go for a walk, or maybe first I eat a meal, I eat something, or I drink something, or maybe I should, or the famous relaxing. I need to first I watch a movie to relax. And then when I'm properly relaxed, and then I'm ready to practice the Dharma. But then, of course, it's 11 o'clock at night, and one has to get up at 6. There's no way to practice Dharma then. And then the mind thinks, okay, tomorrow. So tomorrow I will do better. And then it follows the same sequence. So 20 years later, it's still the same. So no one is waiting for the mind to be relaxed enough and in the right space to practice the Dharma. So it's good to know, so that the lethargy that one is experiencing, also physical pain, so that comes to a great degree, from unpurified karma and unpurified afflicted mental and physical tendencies. Also, if somebody is, I think a very common experience, and it's good to experience these things oneself. In meditation class, it's very common. It's common for the students, also common for the teachers. So the pains for the course leader, so the knees start to ache. One gets this pain in one's legs and in the knees, and so then there's, this one thinks, oh, it's so painful. So, what can I do? So maybe to relax my legs a little bit. So, because especially sitting, in the cross-legged is unfamiliar. So one thinks, so if I pull up my leg, maybe for a few minutes, and then after that I can sit better again. So, of course, then when one pulls up one's leg, so it's a relief. But really, as soon as then no one sits again cross-legged, 2 seconds later, so the pain is back. And I think, it's because the pain, we think it's something physical, but it's, I think, to a great degree, so it's this purification of, afflicted mental and physical tendencies. And also to a great degree, so those afflicted mental and physical tendencies, so they have to do, with anger and also to a great degree with attachment. And so one part of attachment is always looking for the happiness outside. Looking for the happiness outside. And so maybe I thought one positive aspect, of all the restrictions now during this the Corona crisis is one has to stay home more. So that's maybe good for one's Dharma practice, so that one learns to be more stationary in one place, and then also that one learns how to make one's mind happy in that situation. Some people, there is this concept of the Western dynamic lifestyle. And I think there is this concept, also with pictures, people with their mobile phones, looking very happy, looking very dynamic, filled with energy, being in control of their life. It's sort of a little bit, this is a little bit like how one wants to be, and how one could be if one generates actual pliancy. But these kind, because it's usually, this kind of lifestyle, so it involves a huge engagement with external objects. And so this huge engagement with external objects, it automatically counteracts actually one's meditation practice. Like I thought, oh, this is so classic. Maybe during my last or my second last, I think my second last visit, I think. Anyway, it was before you had that place in Queens or Brooklyn. So in that other place, not the Tibet house, the other one. Anyway, so I led a meditation class, and so there was this one young woman, and so she said, in a very maybe she had. I thought, oh, probably she does some yoga or something. She was sitting very straight. But, so she was very engaged with her mobile phone, till right to the start, when I said, okay, now, we all collect our mind internally. And so I thought, oh, she probably has this kind of mind, being extremely focused on the external world. And then thinking, oh, I can just come to a meditation class and sit in the 7-point posture, so like as if the posture is the main thing. And then things will just change, from one moment to the next, as we all do to some degree. And of course, so it didn't work. So I started the meditation, and then so in my mind I sort of counted down 10, 9, 8, and so like 7 or 6. And then she sort of fell together, then she again up, and fell together again, and again up, and couldn't sit still, internally collected, even for like in the minimum amount for a few seconds. And I thought, yeah, so that so that's it's exactly the opposite. So this strong engagement and fixation on external objects. So it's exactly the opposite of meditation practice. So, so meditation practice in general and concentration practice, the object needs to be a virtuous inner object. So that is very important. And so maybe now during the Corona crisis, maybe everybody becomes a little bit more like monks and nuns, staying inside more. But so if one feels sort of bothered or imprisoned, one can sort of think, oh, but like one is always talking about doing retreats, so it's maybe already a good preparation for doing a long retreat later, that I learn how to be more inside and how to have an actual happy mind with mental happiness. Anyway, so the lethargy, and so pliancy, pliancy is the opposite. So by generating so very strong virtuous mental states, so then it generates physical pliancy, mental pliancy. So which is then the opposite. So it produces all those results that one wants. One has a lot of energy, one feels very attentive. There is no darkness in body or mind. One can meditate and practice Dharma for a long time, and so forth. And so this kind of energy that is sort of exemplified by the modern lifestyle. So that is actually sort of pliancy inside, which one then actually has. So, but it has to come, see the recognition, so that's always in Dharma like this, one, so that more afflictions is always not so good. Less afflictions and more the positive mental state, so the opposite. So more afflictions, how to say this one? So with more afflictions, one gets the opposite of what one actually desires, like the strong mental happiness. So with less mental afflictions and more positive mental states. And initially the mind thinks, oh, I'm losing out. But actually, no one gains. So one gets actually exactly that, or what one wants. So mental happiness, mental stability, calmness, etc., strength, and so forth. And then, so then we have excitement. I don't know. We could have a quick question if you have a quick question.
Hi, Venerable.
Yes, please.
I have a question related to
Kathleen,
any
yes.
of these mental factors. Hello, thank you. I feel like some of these mental factors are speaking to me. Lethargy and resentment and attachment. And last week I found it very interesting when you talked about attachment to attachment.
Yes.
So, in the coronavirus crisis, I've been finding myself with a lot of resentment, similar to what George was saying, just feeling stuck or questioning, a lot of anger arising about the situation, how things are handled, and just a feeling of powerlessness. And so a good or not a good, but one of the temporary solutions is, you know, the mind of attachment is able to kind of distract oneself from the resentment. So I mean, it's for me, it's been pretty innocuous, like looking up cooking recipes, but over and over and over and over and over again, you know, like what can I cook? This mind of attachment. But I think I understand, you know, I have had enough exposure to Dharma to understand that. And I really feel unsatisfactoriness in this attachment, in this cycle. But what would you suppose is a more skillful way of dealing specifically with the resentment of that you cannot act on, or you don't want to, you don't have a sense of vengeance, but
yeah. Well, I think it's important to maybe to direct the mind so to the things that are being done right. And that's maybe one thing, so to direct the mind towards something positive. And also in the chapter 6 of the Bodhisattva Avatara on patience. And so Shantideva, he makes this point how mental unhappiness is the fertile ground for anger. And so he emphasizes the importance of meditating on mental happiness, cultivating mental happiness, you know, as a basis really also for one's practice of patience. Because if one is inside or sort of, you know, so like uptight and unhappy and tense, you know, it doesn't take much to get angry. So to cultivate, you know, a sense of like mental happiness. And so you know, there is this famous verse. So if one he gives this verse which is quoted a lot, also which is Holiness the Dalai Lama himself, you know, he says he uses all the time. So you know, if there's something that one can change, to reflect. So if there's something that one can change, so then there is no need. No, there's no need to get angry about it. There is no need to get irritated about it or get anxious about it. So one only needs to apply the method. So if one can change it, and but then now with this kind of situation, you know, it's more probably the second part. So you know, if one can't change, and so then if it's something, if the problem is something that one cannot change, how does it go? Yeah, so you know, if the problem is something that one, you know, that there's no benefit in getting irritated, anxious, unhappy, etc. about it. So it seems, you know, it seems very like a very simple meditation, maybe almost simplistic, maybe, but you see. So you know, our mind. So no, of course, you know, our mind has so many aspects. We have seen that now, but you know, it's like the afflictions. They also, you know, they don't arise just like that. So there's a certain, you know, there's a certain intelligence there. So you know, when our mind, for example, becomes irritated or resentful, usually so underlying that, you know, there is a certain intelligence. It's an afflicted intelligence. So the mind thinks there's some benefit in that, you know, inside. Now, how we can know this is, you know, when we apply these 2 steps, you know, basically simplistically saying, so if there's something I can do, no need to worry, and if there's nothing that I can do, there's no benefit in worrying. So if we, for example, if we reflect this on this verse, and also like to let it sink in, into our mind, like maybe also with the breath, so letting it sink in, so that it takes some effect. Usually there come counter arguments. We find actually it's sort of somewhat surprising that the mind would actually want to be resentful or angry, but we find that actually yes. So there is, there's like the afflicted part of the mind. It has sort of its own deluded logic. And so these two steps, they're very simple, but they're unbelievably effective. Because then when the mind actually realizes that there is actually no benefit for oneself or for others, to be resentful. So then, like our mind, it can be very, it can be very decisive. Sometimes it seems like you can't move it, this way or that. But then in that moment where the mind sort of recognizes there is no benefit, it's sort of like it changes its opinion in that moment. But it really needs to recognize it. So it's not enough. It's not enough to just write it and say, yeah, I can understand these two sentences intellectually. So that's not enough, of course. So anybody, just reading it and sort of understanding the meaning, that alone is not enough. So we really need to apply it. So let it sink into the mind. And then through, I think that helps a lot, really. That really helps a lot. And then also, to look at benefits of the situation. I think that is very useful. That is necessary. In Buddhism, we have the practice of transforming problems. And so even though it seems counterintuitive, so we need to find positive aspects in the problem. And then reflect on those, also keeping the mind focused on those rather than letting the mind spin off into negativity. So that is actually a function of mindfulness, to support the positive thoughts, to make them very stable. So for example, keeping mindful of the positive aspects of the problem. So that is really essential. Especially then also from a Dharma perspective, for example. Like if it's purifying karma, maybe. And also, and also actually, if we include emptiness also, for example, the nominal aspect of emptiness is that all is relative. It's all relative. So it's all relative. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it exists only relative to something else. So it's not possible, but for example, if we just trying to get the example, if you take like a pencil, and we would take that pencil, into totally empty space with nothing to compare it to. One could not say, whether that pencil is long or short, because long or short exists only relative to something else. So if there is something that is longer, then the first object becomes short in comparison to that object. Then, if we have something else that is only like if the pencil is 20 centimeters or 10 centimeters, then if we have something else that is smaller, like just 1 centimeter, but then in comparison to that smaller object, then the pencil is nominally, one can say, is large. Like in comparison to an ant, for an ant, a pencil would be large. Or for a human being, a pencil is small. So that is, it's all relative. And, again, we know that maybe intellectually, but in our mind, because, it's, that understanding is the opposite of the realization. That understanding is the opposite of the grasping at inherent existence and the appearance of inherent existence. So to us, everything appears non-relative. And that is a big problem for our mind. So for example, if our mind is absorbed, so focused on our own problem, it is really very, very helpful to think about other sufferings that are greater. Because compared to the other sufferings that are greater, our suffering is small. And the moment that we realize it, we are not bothered by it anymore. But as long as we think our suffering is inherently big, it will be unbearable. And even just realizing, so our suffering, it's only relatively big, will automatically be like a relief to the mind. So if we include our understanding of dependent arising and emptiness, it's very, very, very useful. I think generally our Dharma practice tends to flourish really when we have difficult situations. So that's really one benefit of a difficult situation. And
Thank you, Venerable.
yes. And so then in relation to the other one, the other part of the question, which becomes the other part of the answer, so I thought to tell like one anecdote. So one of my main teachers, Geshe Da, actually his name is Geshe Da-Yö, but everybody pronounced it Geshe Dawa. And he was actually accomplished yogi. So from his own side, also a very pure practitioner. Lampa Geshe, one of the monks that came from Tibet, so they are regarded as one of the old monks. And so when I was staying with him in Australia, and so Geshe, he told to me, he said it's very good. He said this for me, one older monk to a younger monk. He said it's actually very good to have worldly activities that give temporary happiness to the mind. And like harmless, so comparatively like harmless worldly activities. So like to me at that time, he recommended to go swimming regularly. So I think that is very skillful. So some people, it can give some temporary happiness to go swimming. To other people, it can give some temporary happiness to cook. Maybe the cooking is more beneficial because then one can apply it later and cook for others. And food is one of the primary things to make people temporarily happy. Yeah, so I think that that we need to keep that in mind. I mean, there's on the one hand there's the final result, but that is really very far off. And so we need to also deal with ourselves as we are in the present time. So. It's like I think it's sort of the similar principle, in the I don't know, for some reason that always stayed with me, even though it is actually a story, so it's actually just fiction. But in Dostoevsky's The Karamazov brothers, he talks about this Russian abbot, so a very renounced abbot, but what was it? Or with his tea, he always, so that was like similar to the advice of my teacher Geshe. So in his tea, he always had this little luxury, jam into his tea. So I think, as a normal human being, it's okay to not to forget the jam in one's tea.